Thanks everyone for joining us from all over the world today to discuss and share experiences on why and how to manage risks by working with nature. The event is one of the many events hosted by IED as part of the Development and Climate Days at the Understanding Risk 2020 Forum this year. My name is Xiaoting, your moderator today and a senior researcher at IED based in England. So in the next 50 to 55 minutes, we would like to discuss with all of you why and how to manage risks through nature-based solutions. The session builds on an earlier session today that I hope some of you joined that highlighted why biodiversity loss is an underestimated risk for us and should be tackled jointly with climate change risks and many other risks we're experiencing in this day of age. And the nature-based solutions are actions that protect, sustainably manage, and restore natural or modified ecosystems to address those interlinked societal challenges like biodiversity loss and climate change. Done well, nature-based solutions can have very wide-reaching economic, social, and environmental benefits. For example, biodiverse agriculture production systems can help farmers reduce the risks of loss of pollinators, soil degradation, as well as helping them manage the risks of climate change, including drought and floods. Mangroves and coral reefs can help reduce the risks of severe storm surge damage to coastal communities and provide them with diverse incomes through tourism and sustainable fishing. In today's event, we'll hear from representatives from government, farmer, and private sector sharing their perspectives and experiences. We're also looking forward to learn and hear from all of you in the audience, and we'll try to make this virtual session as interactive as possible. Though we won't be able to see you on this virtual platform, the virtual space does offer us many ways to actively participate. So throughout the event, please feel free to share your perspectives, experiences, reflections on what you heard from speakers or what you have experienced in your own line of work on why and how to manage risk through nature-based solution. You can put those into the chat box. You're also welcome to leave questions to the speakers in the chat box. Please specify which speaker or speakers the question is directed to. If you see any questions other participants ask you really like, you can also say in the chat box that you're interested to learn the answers to the same question. At the very end of the session, we'll have about 20 minutes today for all the speakers to respond to your questions after the presentation. So if there's any question that we feel many people expressed interest in, then we can prioritize those. And feel free to answer each other's questions well if you feel like your experience can contribute to the answers. We do really encourage you all to interact with each other in the chat box throughout the event. So in addition, you can also engage in the discussions through Mentimeter. So based on your experiences and what you hear from speaker today, you can use one word to answer the following question. What benefit can nature-based solution bring to managing risk? Throughout the event, you can go to menti.com and use the code 5409540. You can enter one word each time when you use the code. But as you get inspired throughout the event by speakers and each other, you can always go back to the Menti and enter new words and new ideas. We will look at the final result from Menti at the end of the event. And I think one of my colleagues can also pop this Menti instruction into the chat box, so you can always refer back to the code and the instructions throughout the event. So now I would like to invite our first speaker all the way from South Africa, Mike Jennings. Mike is the Strategic Grant Manager at South African National Biodiversity Institute. He has over 10 years of experience in developing and overseeing the implementation of climate change adaptation projects. Mike will share with us why and how South African governments have been managing risks through nature-based solutions. Over to you, Mike.
Thanks very much, Xiaoting. Hello, everyone. My name is Mike Jennings, and as Xiaoting said, I work for the South African National Biodiversity Institute, which is a government institution under the Department of Environment, Forestry and Fisheries. I'm going to be telling you a little bit about one of the projects that SANBI oversees, the Mgeni Resilience Project, which is funded by the Adaptation Fund. So this project is not government funded, but it is led by local government, and it is a very important pilot project to demonstrate the value of nature-based solutions in managing risk at the local government level. Essentially, what the project is aiming to do is influence relevant policies and procedures to change the way that government funding is directed to better manage climate-induced risks. So this next slide is just to give you an idea about what the landscape looks like where the Umgeni Resilience Project is implemented. It's rural, it's remote, steeply sloped. Community members have to travel on foot and have to cross rivers to get to schools, clinics, and transport nodes. It's forested in places, heavily infested with alien plants on the slopes, with grazing lands in the valley bottoms. And there's lots of subsistence home gardening and livestock grazing, and generally a high dependence on ecosystem goods and services. The climate threats in this area, which are already being experienced and are forecast to get worse, are increase in severe rainfall events and storms leading to flash flooding down these steep slopes, and also strong winds and lightning, as well as increases in temperature, a number of hot days, and seasonal shifts and longer dry spells leading to drought and increased fire risks. So communities living in this area are extremely vulnerable and at risk to climate-induced disaster events. So briefly, these climate threats are exacerbated by a whole bunch of non-climate related issues. I won't spend any time on them, but the so-called triple challenge in South Africa of poverty, inequality, and unemployment, poorly constructed houses like the example in the top left of your screen, poor land use planning and ineffective enforcement or policing of regulations, such as houses being built within wetlands, such as on the top right, dense informal settlements with a whole suite of issues in the bottom left, and then steep slopes and widespread erosion and ecosystem degradation, such as on the bottom right. So back to the ecological infrastructure part of the project. So this is an example of a typical grassland in the area. The climate change-induced shifts are resulting in late onset of rains in a longer dry season. And what that means is that cattle are on the grasslands for longer than they should be, which leads to overgrazing. When rains do fall, as I said, they're now often in severe thunderstorms, which result in the loss of topsoil and extensive gully erosion and downstream deposition of sediments, which essentially is compromising the ability of wetlands in the area to attenuate flooding and deliver other ecosystem goods and services on which the local community are so dependent, and at the same time is decreasing the carrying capacity of the grasslands. This perpetuates additional overgrazing and increases the risk of flooding and the risk to livelihoods of local communities. So it's a negative cycle caused by climate change. So while that's coming up, in response to this, the Umgeni Resilience Project has adopted a nature-based solutions approach to address these risks that are exacerbated by climate change. There are several integrated interventions being implemented, such as the restoration of grasslands and wetlands, some of the planning which you can see here in the picture, the removal of alien invasive plants, cutting of fire breaks, and working with communities and traditional authorities to put in place grazing management plans, all aimed at addressing the issues I just mentioned. There are also a number of complementary interventions that are not necessarily nature-based, such as early warning systems for flooding when the attenuating ability of the restored rivers and wetlands is simply exceeded and communities need to leave the river catchments, as well as early warning systems for fire, lightning, and drought. And then there's a program of work focused on the built environment, as well as climate smart and regenerative agriculture, but I won't go into those now. You'll see in this next slide, there's a couple of photos. On the left is an example of a gully before and during restoration, and we haven't quite got to the after yet, but what I really want to highlight here is, in addition to the on-the-ground restoration work, is the capacity building, awareness, and policy work that the project is undertaking. At a community level, there's been a huge amount of awareness raising material that has been developed and shared, like info sheets and flyers in local languages, such as up top there, and all sorts of graphics that have been talked through with the community, as well as capacity building aimed at bringing communities into the design of the interventions, with the ultimate goal of instilling a sense of local ownership based on an understanding of value of these nature-based solutions, which then means the ecological assets are protected. At a local government level, there's been a different type of awareness raising and capacity building with government decision makers. There's been policy work to identify which policies to target to integrate these nature-based solution approaches into ongoing operations of local government with associated allocations of budget, which is of course vital. As part of this project, a toolkit was developed aimed at decision makers and traditional authorities to mainstream these, in this case, ecosystem-based adaptation solutions into local planning. In some sense, it's been an easy sell. The disaster management officers at local government level are mandated to respond to incidents after disasters occur. and they are inundated with calls after these climate-induced disasters strike. And what it ends up looking like is these officers handing out relief packages, so responding retrospectively to risk. And the idea is to redirect government budget to take more of a proactive approach, including a focus on nature-based solutions, to mitigate these risks and prevent or reduce the impacts of these climate-induced disasters. Is just another landscape shot of the area where some of the alien invasive removal has taken place. I think the area is beautiful. If you live there, obviously, you're exposed to a whole suite of risks, as I've described. And then the next slide is just the last slide, which shows some of the community beneficiaries. In this case, go to the next slide, a women's farming cooperative that was established in the area. So I focused on this project. Sandy is also developing a very interesting project under the Green Climate Fund, which is taking this and a whole bunch of ongoing nature-based solution of policy work to scale through what we call an ecosystem-based disaster risk reduction project. That's only a proposal now, so I didn't want to focus on it, but perhaps there'll be a chance to talk more in the Q&A session. Thank you very much. I believe that's my 7 minutes. Thanks, bye.
Thanks very much, Mike. Thanks for highlighting that how the triple challenge of poverty, climate change, biodiversity risks are all interlinked and can exacerbate each other and causing the negative cycle, and how nature-based solution coupled with other technologies can work together effectively to monitor, assess, and proactively manage those interlinked risks. And also highlighting the importance of bringing in local voices and values to make those solutions work. And I just want to say welcome to all the people who just joined us. Please do keep introducing yourself in the chat box. And remember, we also have a Mentimeter going, which has a link in the chat box. Please follow that as well. And then I would like to invite our second speaker, who will take us all the way from South Africa to Asia, Wuli Ival, who is a senior advisor for Forest Farm Facility at the Vietnam Farmers Union. Viva has deep experiences and interest in policy advocacy, education, and training to enhance the capacity of farming organizations. And she has a lot of experience developing community-based and nature-based solutions in forest and agriculture sector. So over to you, Ival.
Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Yvonne. I work for Vietnam Farmer Union. And today I'm very pleased to talk with you how VNFU integrate NBS into risk management for forest and farm producer. Vietnam Farmer Union, we have more than 10 million members in whole country in the forestry sector, agriculture, fishery, etc. in rural development. And 1/3 of them, they are living in forestry and forest landscape and mountainous area. This is why today we talk about how we can help them to manage risk. Do you know that the farmer have many problems? First, we see that the biodiversity loss due to the above chemical and deforestation, soil erosion already pose a big risk to farmer in Vietnam because the farmer lost access to natural resources and culture heritage that are important for their farming and forestry business and way of life. This risk is compounded by climate change and more frequent and severe flood and drought impact the production for farm and forestry product every year. And this year we have the COVID is the impact to their life more seriously because some product broken supply chain. And it may be was why to mention how small farmer and especially at the risk to for example that you can say that they often have limited resources and capacity to manage their risk. And the lack of financial services, for example, the insurance and some other credit that can help farmer mitigate their risk. And how Vietnam Farmer Union to integrate NBS into risk management. First, we use a participatory approach in whole process to help them. We carefully to listen to farmer and to identify the risk and their difficulty, and how we can use NBS to respond to their problem. And we organize a roundtable discussion at all levels. And this is a key to open the door and engage the local authority, public and private sector to support and work with the FFPO to manage risk through the NBS we present for them. And we organize a training course for farmers in different subjects, including the risk management and business planning. We improve their capacity and based on the NBS and risk management strategy. And we also support them to work on business, like business incubation and value chain approach linked with the responsible natural resources use in business planning, contract farming with the company and private sector to supply and develop the sustainable product chain with the certification like the organic farm, organic certification, participatory warranty system for small farmer certification, or global gap or Vietgap we use in Vietnam, etc. And we organize a peer-to-peer learning and exchange visit among the farmers, and they can learn each other through this activity, and they create some idea among farmers. Yes. And how we continue to work with farmers. Vietnam Farmer Union, we not only work with farmers, but we also work with the policy maker in other with the other ministry. And now we encourage and work advocate how we develop some policy on forest and agriculture combination policy. And we continue to support FFPO to implement NBS, sustainable forest and farm practices, organic certification to respond to risks. And we continue to work with farmers to assess the risk and in their landscape and supporting them to implement the forest landscape approach to use the NBS to manage the multi-risk and like the biodiversity loss and climate change. And we still work with the farmer. It is especially important to not just we support farmer to build in systematic risk management and management into their business. We also train those farmers to use the ecosystem-based approach and to manage those risks and develop product value chain with the private sector and sustainable way. Yes. And we continue to work with other stakeholders, and we make the communication and propaganda for the people understand what is the NBS and how we can NBS approach to solve the problem with the society. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Yvonne. Thanks for sharing the interesting experiences from Vietnam and how those risks can actually be incorporated into business models and business incubations. And the fact that to promote nature-based solutions implementation, it's not only important to understand the technical side, but it's also important to work with policymakers, build different capacities. There's various other work we need to do to make nature-based solution for managing those risks, important risks for vulnerable farmers into their business models. So now we're going to switch landscape. We have been on land, but we're now going to go to the ocean side. And with Chip Conliffe, the Director of Sustainable Development and the AXA-XL. Chip established and managed AXA's Ocean Risk Initiative, which works to identify innovative insurance and finance solutions to the impacts and implications of ocean-related risk. He also co-chairs the Ocean Risk and the Resilience Action Alliance that was launched in 2019. Over to you, Chip.
Sure thing. Thank you very much indeed. Look, as Xiaoting's just said, I do run this Ocean Risk Initiative, and the idea is to integrate nature-based solutions into our risk management solutions. We know that coastal ecosystems, of course, provide that protective barrier, but of course, and yet they also provide jobs and livelihoods and food security and carbon sequestration and biodiversity alongside. And yet I think we're still very aware that they are still undervalued and probably rarely incorporated into risk management strategies and indeed models as well. And yet I think that they are a critical component of disaster risk management and indeed climate adaptation in countries that lack that financial resource to fund relief and recovery and post-disaster reconstruction efforts. We know that 800 million people will be at risk from storm surge linked to extreme weather events by 2050. The insurance industry has paid out over $300 billion in the last 10 years for coastal storm damage, and yet given that not everybody has insurance, it's quite likely that huge amounts of money will have been paid out by the lender of last resort, so governments themselves. And so the UN has asked for a transformative response in this space. And I think there's a real need to shift the trajectory by anticipating the risks through mitigation, but also through adaptation as well. And that, of course, links to nature-based solutions. We know that there's been quite a lot of work to calculate the protective benefits of ecosystems. And in terms of mangroves and reefs, that's particularly important. Research suggests that for a 100-year storm event, flood damages would increase by 91% to over $270 billion if you took those reefs away. And indeed, if you look at mangroves, their flood protection benefits are worth about $65 billion a year. And so if you take those away, you're looking at 15 million more people being flooded annually across the world. I think that given that the nature spent many millions of years protecting those coastlines with nature itself, then it seems a logical next step for us to be able to integrate the protective benefits into our risk management approaches. One of the things that we are doing, in fact, before I go on to this Coastal Risk Index, last month we announced and launched a feasibility study with the Nature Conservancy and the University of California, Santa Cruz, on the feasibility of developing a mangrove insurance product. The idea is to assess the risk reduction of benefits of mangroves across the Caribbean, and we examined the opportunities for developing mangrove and indeed indemnity products to cover the cost of restoring mangroves after a severe weather event. And we found that over 3,000 kilometers of coastline in 7 different countries across the Caribbean have favorable market conditions for that kind of insurance. But looking at this Coastal Risk Index, well, the idea behind this is really to price risk with and without healthy reef and mangrove ecosystems. So, of course, if you take away a reef, the risk profile on land will change, whether that be for an asset or a community. And so the idea behind the index is sort of is very much to look at three different areas. One is the risk to physical assets from storm surge and sea level rise. A second piece is about assessing social vulnerability and flood hazard. And then thirdly, to look at the risk to income streams linked to the degradation of those ecosystems. And the idea is really to enable us to transfer that risk from coastal communities. It's certainly to be able to help multilateral agencies to better assess the risk profile of target countries. But then looking at the more sort of the localized level is to assist those local policymakers to map their liabilities and to direct those funds more effectively. And of course, all of the above will help us to protect and manage more sustainably those ecosystems as well. So just in terms of the links to vulnerable communities, as Xiaoting said, I co-chair the Ocean Risk and Resilience Action Alliance, which has an aim of driving $500 million worth of investment into nature-based solutions along coastlines by 2030. It's been, all the G7 countries signed up to it. We're working with members in the Global South, and our focus is very much on the small and developing states and emerging economies. But we're also working across private sectors and the NGO and MDBs as well. And as you can see here, there are three different pillars. One about practice innovation, science and research, and policy and governance. And more specifically, in the Philippines, working with RARE, we're working on linking fisher folk to more formal financial services. So using microinsurance to strengthen the financial resilience of fisher folk. And the idea then is to be able to decrease the need to overfish in those waters and increase the adaptive capacity of communities and building the resilience of the local economy. When we're focused on science and research, we're working with the Stockholm Resilience Centre on a couple of pieces of research. One is about addressing the gender dimension of ocean risk, as we see on this slide, but also we are developing and assessing emerging opportunities and risks for small and developing states and LDCs from the growing blue economy. And then finally, we as Aura itself is really trying to promote the enabling policies to drive investment into those most vulnerable areas of the world. So look, I think that just to wrap up, there's a lot of work that can be done. I think there's some work, well, we are obviously starting work in this space, but I think nature-based solutions can and should be integrated into risk management solutions ongoing. Xiaoting, back to you.
Thanks so much, Chip. Thanks for highlighting those starking numbers at the beginning that really brings home the message why we need to work with nature to manage those climate change risks. And very interesting to hear those innovative ways from the insurance sector on how moving towards building those risks in insurance approach, so nature's role in disaster risk management is no longer really underestimated. And I just want to remind everyone to ask questions to the speakers. We really want to hear from you and also participate in the Mentimeet. And with that, I'll just try to invite every speaker, all the speakers back. There is one question that been posted by the participant. So all the speakers talked about how nature-based solution can benefit human societies through many different ecosystem services. I think the question is more about then, from your experience working with nature and those nature-based solutions, how does then it impact nature itself? Is there any evidence that actually those approaches that you see in communities, Mike, I think with you, restoration in South Africa's drylands and the grasslands, and then evolve in Vietnam, working with farmers for different more sustainable agroforestry, farming activities and forestry activities, and the chip in the ocean landscape where the mangroves and the coral reefs being restored. Have you seen the impacts on nature itself? Can it help nature itself also to recover from the various risks nature faces at the moment? So I think maybe we go back to Mike first.
Sure, Xiaoting. Yeah, so thanks for the question. Yeah, I mean, I do agree. Certainly, from Sandy's side, a focus of the Adaptation Fund is on the most vulnerable populations. So a lot of our work focuses on how nature-based solutions can build the resilience of those vulnerable communities. But at the same time, there's absolutely benefits for nature or for ecosystems. The areas where we are working are degraded. So through these restoration and rehabilitation practices, or through protecting intact areas, strategic water source areas are a good example. There's improved ecological functioning, there's biodiversity benefits, there's carbon sequestration that happens in soil carbon, and all a whole suite of benefits. So I think it's a case of a no regrets approach, in that there's downstream benefits to communities as well as benefits to nature and ecological systems as well. I think an important aspect in this regard is also working within corridors of biodiversity from Sandy's perspective. So, taking what we call a catchment to coast approach. So instead of doing pockets of restoration, which might benefit a community surrounding that area, if you can take a corridor approach where areas are restored or protected all the way through, from inland and hinterland where the rain falls and water is stored, all the way down through the landscape to the coast, then there's great many benefits in those corridors where biodiversity can move through. Thanks.
Thanks. That's great last point on how, when we think about the impacts on nature, it's not just the pockets. Really need to think about the corridor and the interlinked factor of how the ecosystem resilience and the impact on nature itself need to be think at a bigger scale. Eval, can we go to you next? In Vietnam, what have you seen the impacts on nature itself?
Yes, in Vietnam, when we work with the one area, we make the baseline study. In baseline study, we invite a forest farmer and local authority to join. And based on that, they determine what they have in the area, what they have in forest, the water and land. And based on that, we show them that if we use our natural resources with responsibility, we can not only to improve our forest, but we also can have the biodiversity in the forest landscape, and we can get more money from diversity of product under the forest. This is very important when we have the roundtable discussion and group discussion with the farmer. This is why when we have the planning to use a nature-based solution, almost the people understand. If they do not understand, some people maybe cut the forest, and maybe some people want to use the forest land for cultivation, for agricultivation. This is why very important. We have to make the planning based on society discussion, and almost the people in that area have to understand and to discuss how they have the solution. This is the first issue. And the second thing, sometimes we have the planning, what area we can develop the forest, what area we can develop the farm product. We work together and we develop the value chain from the forest product and agriculture product with the friendly environment friendly farming, like organic farming, like ecosystem farming. Based on that, people understand that if they have the good quality of product, they can sell with higher price, they can subsidize their livelihood, they can get more money, they still can keep the forest for longer time. This is a thing I think that after they understand, we have to help them to go on business issue and develop their product by value chain and work private sector. And the third thing, in some cases, if they live in forest area, but some companies they build the hydro power. they have to pay money for those for local authority to subsidy for the people who are living in that area. We call it the uh, environment ecosystem fund or payment. This is very important that almost the people in that area have to think how we can keep the forest and natural resources. If the company they want to do some tourism business, they have to pay for the people there also. This is why we encourage the people, not only the government or the farmer, to have to use the natural resources with the responsibility use. But the company and other people, they get more money from their services and from the forest, from the water. They have to pay money also. Yes, this is the way we work together. But in some cases, if we do not have the roundtable discussion among multi-stakeholders, the people do not concentrate about their responsibility. But when we work with the farmer and with the relevant stakeholder and local authority also, and government officer on forestry and agriculture, we create the forum for people to talk, for the farmer to talk about their problem. And almost the people have to think and have to discuss how we solve problem based on the nature, the nature-based solutions. This is why we think that first we have to work and listen to the farmer their difficulty. The second thing, we create the forum and roundtable discussion among stakeholders to discuss how we solve problem. And the third thing, we advocate the policy maker and ministry and government officer to step by step to develop the policy how we can respond to the problem of farmer based on the natural resources, natural solution-based solutions. And the third thing, I think the education from farmer very important also. If farmers understand, they not only use a very responsibly with their farming, but they also talk with other stakeholders, and they can use their resource very carefully. For example, we have the bamboo forest. When we teach them how the bamboo forest can help them not only in the environment protection, prevention flood and etc., but they can keep for people there the water from the mountain. This is why when farmers understand, they not only protect the bamboo forest, but they can use water from the mountain to their rice field, and they can create some tourism, forest tourism for the people to come there to earn the more money. But they keep the forest, and they can make some handicraft from the forest. They sell to the tourism, but they still keep the nature very carefully. And I think it's very important that we have to listen to the people, discuss with society how we can solve problem, and then we work with them to determine the solution based on the natural resources, and encourage almost stakeholders to work together. I think it's very important.
Great, thanks. And yeah, it's good to hear that the importance of having that baseline at the very beginning, so then you understand the local conditions of nature, and then you can monitor better the impacts of nature and design appropriate local solutions. And also quite interesting then to also hear that the reason that I think all the speakers has been talking about how nature can benefit human society more is because the impacts in reality, when we want to actually have the positive impacts on nature, as Eval gave so many examples, we must show how improved nature or resilient nature can deliver benefits to most vulnerable communities who are living with those nature every day. So you get more multi-stakeholder support than to ensure that there's a positive impact on nature and ensure that nature can be restored and protected and sustainable used. So that's kind of, I think all speakers specifically emphasize on benefits to human and human societies because of that, as Eval used, speak quite eloquently, giving so many examples from Vietnam. And I think we'll come back also later with our other speakers on the point you mentioned about the importance of multi-stakeholder collaborations and different roles. But before we go back to that point, Chip, over to you about the kind of how nature-based solution, have you seen impacts on nature itself? How does that help human, but also the ecosystem to be more resilient as well?
Yeah, look, I think it's if we're looking to help communities, then we are looking obviously to through nature-based solutions. Then evidently, I think it's probably evident that we would see a link to the benefits for biodiversity and nature itself. And given that the UN and many others are now talking about the biodiversity crisis, as is needed, there's a real focus, I think, on driving and being cognizant of and integrating biodiversity into our plans. AXA in 2018 added biodiversity to its corporate responsibility focuses. And we launched last year a 350 million euro fund to invest in biodiversity across the world in different projects. And so, for us, it's very much a integral part of our focus now, and hugely important that we look at biodiversity itself alongside the benefits to communities. But I also think that there's a piece about education and literacy here, and that the real requirement, not only for, and I suppose this crosses lots of different boundaries, from formal education in schools to ensure that in the future we have leaders making sustainable decisions with knowledge of what they're making a decision on, and then moving into the corridors of power and indeed across the private sector and the public sectors to better understand the importance of biodiversity and nature for our health on the planet.
Thanks, Chip. That's really good example to hear from private sector of investing in biodiversity and making that integral focus of our future work. And I think that also reflects, if everyone knows, the leaders' pledge on biodiversity that have emerged in the UN Biodiversity Summit in September, where we see not just government, not only community members, but a lot of private sector also is thinking more strategically about how we need to definitely think about not just the benefits for human, but at the same time biodiversity itself, which basically underlines the human resilience. And Eval and Chip both mentioned about the importance of education and for youth and farmers all being more educated and making more informed decisions in the future. And again, I would welcome all the participants to ask questions or share your experiences on this question as well and participate in the Mentimeter. But also at the same time, I just want to go back to Chip and Mike, both of you, because Eval gave us really great examples of how that multi-stakeholder platform works to promote nature-based solutions and the importance of different stakeholders having different roles to play to implement nature-based solutions. We heard from Eval's Vietnam example where government has payment for ecosystem services, policies that then enable farmers and give finance to farmers to then implement nature-based solution in a watershed, the importance of organizing the community itself because they're the change makers on the ground, and then how to then link with private sector, have a supply chain that make the nature-based solution more sustainable in the future financially. And so it's not just only dependent on public sector's finance. So that's a great example from Vietnam. Mike, probably going back to you in South Africa, do you have you experienced that type of multi-stakeholder platform? Do you have some examples of how different stakeholders can come together to work? As we all know, multi-stakeholder partnership is quite important also to ensure that we use nature to help us manage different risks for different stakeholders.
Thanks, Shanting. Absolutely. That multi-stakeholder approach is key and vital, as you say, to demonstrating the benefits and sustaining what has been put in place after, for example, donor funding projects end. A couple of examples from the project I just mentioned, in fact, the Mgeni Resilience Project. At the community, there's lots of different forums where, as you say, stakeholders from government to the private sector down to the community level are involved and all kept updated on the project progress. But at the community level, it was really interesting, and that again these forums were developed, and it only was at that stage that different members from the community, different land users, started seeing the mutual benefits of these nature-based solutions approaches. So, where one intervention could benefit so many different people in the same way, whereas before there was kind of a disconnect. So farmers weren't understanding that the same intervention could benefit them as could benefit cattle and livestock grazers or rearers. And once the project took a more integrated approach, the community kind of came together, and there was more of a sense of ownership in supporting these interventions because of the range of benefits to different stakeholders. And it's something that Yvonne mentioned earlier, and it's so important, is the business side of it, into the private sector, in fact. Particularly for donor-funded projects, because the classic example is where donor funding ends, and then what? What funds are available to sustain the intervention? So again, in this project, from a business side, through this multi-stakeholder engagement, it became apparent that there were farmers and there were young entrepreneurs, and they weren't necessarily talking to each other. So through cooperatives that were established, all of a sudden the farmers said, well, we have produce, we're not just quite sure how to get it to market. And the entrepreneurs said, well, we know exactly how to do that, we're just not sure how to get the produce. So in working together, these value chains started emerging. And a couple of seasons into the project, there's no longer need for donor funds, because farmers are taking their share and then buying crops and the inputs they need to continue farming. So it's been a really, really important part of the project. And there's many examples of such collaboration where there's been huge successes in other projects as well. Thanks.
Great, Mike. Yeah, different stakeholders will have different knowledge of different parts of this complex, the part of risk management. So it's great also to hear the example from South Africa. And Chip, I think the Ocean Risk and Resilience Action Alliance actually is a multi-stakeholder alliance itself. Maybe can you give a little bit more details of how you get those multi-stakeholders to work together and think about risks in the insurance perspective and making the nature as a no longer an undervalued risk?
Yeah, look, I think that, as you say, Aura is very much that sort of multi-stakeholder alliance, and I think that certainly out of the Ocean Risk Summit that took place in 2018, we sort of realised that there were very few organisations that were sort of working in this space. And the fact that if we were looking to build solutions, we needed to do it across, cross collaboration. So, that public-private partnership is absolutely critical. So the idea of identifying, and I think the other part of this was about, identifying projects that could be invested in, and the pipeline is very short. And so the other part of what Aura is doing is really sort of to develop the pipeline of projects, to bring together the risk managers and modelers, the public sector, to potentially bring some catalytic funding into the space, alongside, or concessional funding, and alongside others from the private sector to develop some collaborative solutions into the space. And it can't be done any other way. The insurance industry cannot do this alone. The finance industry can't do it alone. The governments can't do it alone either. So we have to be working together. And I think that the role Aura can play is being that convener, and identifying sort of the problems that we need to overcome, and developing solutions, and exactly what we're trying to do.
Thanks. That's a great note to almost end our session, that we all in this together and we all need to work together to think about how then we can use nature-based solution to more effectively manage risks. Unfortunately, we're coming towards the end of the webinar, but before we finish, we do want to look at the final Mentimeter result with all of you. Great. Yeah, it's great to see there's some consensus coming through, and we can see that resilience obviously is the most important thing that we need to think about, long-term solutions, adaptive approach to make sure that both nature and also the humans, our society is resilient to adapt to all those different risks. So the adaptation landscape approach, inclusiveness, it's great to see that those and multiple landscapes use engagement. It's really important for us to keep all those different components in mind, and those enabling conditions for us to all work together, as Chip said so well, to make sure that we can effectively work with nature to manage different risks. So thanks everyone for participating, and I will share this with everyone, including the recording of this session on the website later. And with that, I just want to thank all the speakers and the participants who gave us such a rich discussion today. The session, as I mentioned, the session has been recorded. We'll share after on the event webpage. We hope this small space has provided all of you with some food for thought and useful contacts. So please continue to discuss with each other, reach out to others you met over the webinar and the speakers, so we can continue to learn from each other. We do welcome you to give us any feedbacks on the webinar, and also welcome you to learn more about IED's work on the intersection between nature, climate, development, including how to use nature-based solution to manage risks. We very much look forward to future collaborations and continued discussion with all of you. And some of the suggested readings, including some how IED has documented some of the stories of how we can work with nature to manage the pandemic risk in addition to biodiversity risk and climate change risk. We actually launched a story today in conjunction with the local adaptation focus of this adaptation week. So you're welcome to look at those stories from all over the world on how working with nature can help people manage risks. And welcome to visit our webpage on the ecosystem-based adaptation approach for climate change. And also, there's some really useful links being shared through the chat box throughout the event. So do have a look. There's some various useful links our speaker have shared that would really highlight their points as well. And again, do send us feedbacks and get in touch if you have any further questions and insights to share with us. With that, we can now officially close the session. Thanks, everyone.